Right, so morning ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in today. So I think today we're going to be talking a little bit about how we've maximized learning, and the presentation will be in two parts. So there will be a piece talking about some of the theory and some of our experience, and the second part will be about a case study in terms of some recent work we've done within Panasonic. So we'll cover off L&D strategy, how that needs to align and integrate with business strategy. Talk through a little bit about how we drive engagement in this topic. There's a big piece around goals and how they need to align with what your broader business is trying to achieve. And then we'll go onto the case study. So when we talk about L&D and business strategies, too often we embark on this really exciting prospect of creating something unique and something that's going to drive our own business forward, without necessarily taking into consideration the impact on the broader business. So when we want to embark on this piece around L&D, it's very important that we take a moment and understand, how does it fit in with the broader business? What is the broader business trying to achieve that I might link into? Or if you take a risk, you go in and you plow through with your L&D strategy and you find you end up conflicting with what the broader business is trying to achieve. And once you've had a chance to really get to grips with your own L&D strategy and the business is happy with it, it's then a really good opportunity to articulate your objectives. Put them out there. Make them tangible. Make them easy to grasp, because not everyone is going to be a learning and development expert. Not everyone is going to have the level of experience that you've got. So deliver simple concepts that people throughout the organization can relate to. And then to make it something that is measurable and trackable and you can understand whether or not you're achieving a level of success, deploy a measure of KPIs, so your key performance indicators. Now, we talk about numbers. We talk about how many courses have people completed, how many bits of content have we actually deployed. Those are just basic measures. A key performance indicator should be something that when you look at it on a piece of paper or on a screen, it tells you with certainty how you are achieving your success. And there's generally no more than sort of 4 or 5 that you want to be tracking over a period of time. And then I guess importantly, don't just deploy the strategy and leave it. People need to see movement. It needs to be constantly reviewed and refreshed. If your business is one that is moving on, if your business is accelerating and gaining pace and is agile, your strategy needs to keep pace with that. So take the time to refresh it, take the time to understand whether it's still relevant. And then bring your stakeholders along on that journey. So this is people who are going to sponsor your strategy, your projects. These are people who are going to be involved in deploying them. But also the people on the front line, who's going to be potentially on the receiving end of this L&D. They all have a voice. And all too often, we lose sight of involving people as part of our L&D strategy. So we talk about, we want to deliver a framework that enables agile learning. We want to provide a holistic opportunity for people to make the best of themselves. And those strategies tend to focus on the process, on the framework, on the platforms, and remove the human element from it. So we need to ask ourselves, what are we truly trying to develop? Are we trying to develop our people? Or are we trying to develop the skills that our people have enabled to do their specific role? And I think that also then gives us a steer in terms of how we want to position our strategy and our deployment with our key stakeholders. And they need to be involved. The sponsors of your project, they need to be involved. Seek out key people in your organization who can help influence those around you. So it's really difficult to try and deploy something in a vacuum or in a silo. So having people who fight in your corner whenever you're challenged or if they're challenged about a particular course of action really helps to pave the way for some of these things. And the stark reality is, unfortunately, learning and development is not important to everyone. So we've created this beautiful strategy that we think is going to change the world, and we speak to stakeholders, and we speak to groups of people, we take to steering committees, and there are people who just either don't get it or who have no interest. Now there are strategies to overcome that. Recognizing everyone as an individual and is unique, and tailoring your communication approach is one way to do it. But it's also knowing when to pause and potentially move on or around someone. And I think there's the other piece around you've gotten to what you perceive to be your finishing line. You've done your presentations, you've engaged your steering committee, you've deployed it, and now you think, that's it, I can now sit back and this is just going to run. We've deployed LinkedIn Learning, we've deployed a Udemy course, everyone's now going to flock to it, and everyone's going to be really well educated. And the reality is that generally doesn't happen. From our own experience, Panasonic as an organization released LinkedIn Learning, must have been 18 months ago, and the dozen or so people in my team I've spoken to about who's actually used it. I think one person's used it just to see what it's about. So if you're going to drive something, if you're going to invest your own time and effort in getting it out there, see it all the way through. Keep beating that drum of your message. Talk about your success. Another thing we've spoken about, provoking involvement right from the outset. So if you're going to create something with the view to deploying it to a group of people, try engaging them. Try engaging people from different parts of your organization or different parts of that project journey, because they're all going to come at you with a different perspective on what they want to get out of it. And then there's the bit around how is this going to drive performance? And we're back to talking about putting people at the center of the strategy. So the whole core of it is learning and development is effectively for the people, which in turn is for the benefits of the organization. And I guess realizing that value genuinely exists in each of us, and also that each of us is unique, is where a really well-balanced L&D strategy becomes very important. So it's not just a case of send Johnny Evans on a training course about leadership, and then he comes back into the office and he just carries on with his day-to-day life. That feels very much like a tick box exercise. Taking time to understand who Johnny Evans is half the challenge. How does he learn? What are his skills gaps? What does he need from this, and what do we as a business need for him to get from this experience? So when we talk about unlocking that value, it also has to lead to some sort of tangible, measurable change. So just having Johnny come back to his desk and continuing as he always has is not going to give you that change. There has to be some type of feedback loop that closes out that success, that enables you to measure somehow that actually Johnny went out to learn how to be a leader, and now he's come back into the business, and wouldn't you know it, he's actually leading. He's got people who like him, people talk about him, he's making progress in all of his functional areas, so that learning has had a really good measurable outcome. Okay, there we go. Not everything will go according to plan. That wasn't on purpose, that was generally a mistake. So there are going to be times where you'll set out on a path, a course of action, and it just won't land. People won't get it, and you'll need to be brave enough to be able to take a moment to reflect on whether or not the plan is still valid. And if you really believe it is, back yourself and push it. And if it isn't, stop, review what needs to be changed, engage people that you need to engage, and then move forward. So going back to talking about this whole measurable piece, there are challenges within business where you'll go and talk about an L&D strategy. Your stakeholders might not get it. They might not understand the value that it brings. And it's potentially because they don't see how it links into business success. So you have a great idea about creating this learning strategy and these wonderful content and deploying all of these great platforms. The business might not be able to get just how it's going to benefit from you deploying 15 courses and sending everybody on leadership and development courses and coaching the facilities staff and how to drive procurement negotiations. Because all of that stuff sort of falls under transactional measures. How many courses did someone go on? How often did someone visit a certain piece of content? It's transactional, and in isolation doesn't really give you much. So understanding what your overall business goals are. Oh, we want to drive sales, we want to retain a certain percentage of our customers, enables you then to structure your learning goals around that and making sure that they are genuinely measurable. So we're back to this piece around key performance indicators. All of the stuff that you do should have a level of measurability whereby you can sit down with anyone inside your business and very clearly point out that your strategy is delivering against a set of key performance indicators, and it removes any ambiguity. So I want to talk a little bit about the Panasonic case study, and we had some significant challenges within our business, in particular within customer care. We had attrition, which is we had a load of agents coming in the business and leaving the business. And these are people who talk to customers day in, day out about a problem with their television or a problem with their microwave oven. And we had this conveyor belt of people, and we didn't really understand why. That impacted our customer net promoter score, which is the level of advocacy that customers have for Panasonic as a brand. And it also showed us that actually our colleague net promoter score was very, very low. Can I just check for a second? Does everybody know what net promoter score is? If anyone doesn't, can you just give me a hand and I can talk it through with you. So very briefly, so net promoter score is based on a single survey question about would you recommend a brand or a service to a friend or family member? And you then take the measure as being the difference between the people that would versus the people that wouldn't necessarily. And you're left with a percentage that exists on a scale between plus 100% and minus 100%. Now, for customer care, for consumer electronics, when you talk about customer net promoter score, plus 5 is about okay. And when you start hitting into sort of 50s and 60s, that's when you're really at the top echelon of delivering an exceptional level of service. So for us to have a colleague score that is a minus 20 was a bit of a shock to us, and we knew we needed to address it. So from an L&D perspective, we dug into a lot of the root cause around that. Why are people feeling like this, both our customers and our agents? And I think the foundation of it was, well, we didn't really have a strategy. We kind of went in and thought we just have to answer phones and emails and everyone's going to be happy. People will learn through osmosis, so simply sitting there, absorbing stuff from their screen, that'll be enough. The training curriculum was very unbalanced. So we talk about having a few hundred customer care people, and of their entire training curriculum of 4 weeks, 10% of their customer care training was actually about customer care. The rest of it was learning about process, product, policy. So there was a big issue we needed to address. And then we had other challenges around the content and where it existed, access to actual trainers. So we had one trainer for a couple of hundred people, which was just never going to be enough. So we had to dig deep to understand where do we start with this. So we addressed the other stuff. We addressed the strategy, we addressed the stakeholders, and I'm not going to talk you through every step of the journey. We don't have time, and the reality is some of it's quite boring. What I will do, though, is call out some of the areas where we faced significant challenge, or some of the areas where we actually saw some really good success. So when we talk about putting people at the heart of our strategy, we had this idea that as customer care people, we build out these elaborate customer journeys and these really rich customer experiences, highlighting moments of truth, highlighting risk, highlighting opportunity. And we thought, it's a really good idea. Why don't we do this for our own internal people? Let's invest some time in thinking about people that actually work with us. So we took all of that knowledge and experience about building our journeys, and we built out, it's a very simple version, we built out these employee experience journeys whereby we could highlight, as part of an employee's journey through Panasonic, where were they feeling vulnerable? Where was this risk? Where were they feeling pain? Where are there moments for us as a company to intervene and really enrich their experience? So we wanted to adopt a marketing approach and apply personas to groups of agents with similar character traits. Now, that was really difficult for people to grasp as a concept. So we spoke to some stakeholder groups, we spoke to some groups of agents, and the real heavy pushback was that they didn't want to be felt like they were being pushed into a box. They didn't want to feel like their persona was going to constrain their development opportunities. So we had to take pause for thought. We kept the principle of the employee experience, but what we then did is we had to really dig into the fabric of what it means to be a customer care person. And the more we looked at it, the more we started to understand that this individual comes into the office and they sit down and they put on their headset and they tune in to this computer screen. And that becomes their world for most of the day. It's incredibly isolating. They don't really have time to socialize because they're doing so many contacts per day. They then have to do training. They then get scored on their training. There's very little time to decompress. And I think we then took a really good appreciation as to why agents were joining and then leaving because they were struggling. So what we then looked at doing was building out a much richer, not just a learning development program, but also a wellness program. So we needed something to help us to achieve that. So we took care of all the content and we made it rich and engaging. We used a mix of video and text, but we needed something to act as a foundation stone. So we engaged with a company called Fuse, who supplied and provided this socially engaging learning collaboration platform, which acted like a virtual window for these agents to a broader community. And on there, we started putting up the content. We really liked it because it was fun. You could introduce a load of gamification. And we went through this process of engaging people as part of the delivery. So we didn't just create this concept and deploy it. The Fuse team were really good at supporting us through the graphical design, the usability. We engaged the agents themselves to help us design the interface, the colors, the Spark logo, which they created for us. And then went through the rest of the project around making sure that people understand what it was we needed for reports and for content. And what we saw off the back of that was we had a group of really, really engaged colleagues. Once we started understanding their well-being needs, once we started providing the right level of training and support, and it was an ongoing drumbeat of content, of meetings, of focus groups, we didn't deploy it and leave it. We had to hold everyone's hand, and we still do. We saw that our customer net promoter scores have gone from 32 to 44, and our agent net promoter scores have significantly improved from minus 22 to plus 35. That's a 53 percentage point shift. And we constantly check in with them about how they find using the platform, how they enjoy using the actual content itself. And we track this almost real time using a happy or not kiosk thing. So these things you see in Heathrow Airport with smiley faces, we've got those in our contact centers. So we know in real time how customers are generally feeling in terms of sentiment. So we also then, to appease the business, tied that back in terms of, right, so for the business, what this means is we've actually saved some money. Now, we never went out with the explicit purpose of wanting to save money. This was people-centric. We want to drive a customer experience. We want to drive a colleague experience. But a nice byproduct is that we've actually saved a bit of money by doing this. Now, that's enabled us then to take some of that saving and look at how we potentially reinvest it in scaling out this L&D strategy a bit more broadly, how we invest in some of the content that we create, how we invest in our colleague well-being days. So they have a fruit day and a chocolate day and a coffee day and a grain and seed day, and they really engage with those activities. But there's so much more that we want to do in terms of offering them well-being support and also learning and development support. So that's everything I've got for you today. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your morning to listen to me. Let's not do questions right now. I think we'll hold that for later. But just to say, thank you very much for having me.
There are some questions that I've got. I have a list. It's interesting to see, we'll pick them up after. We'll do the questions after. Yeah, I'm already putting a list of questions together, so really useful. What I particularly like is the linking it into a tangible measure at the end, that Net Promoter Score. So there's some interesting conversations around that, I think, perhaps. Thank you for that, Bruce. Very much appreciated. Now, a different approach, which I think is interesting, and we need to think about how we can reflect these. I'll pass over to Andy. So, Andy, over to you.
Right, thanks very much, Bruce, for a great presentation. And can I say, this is the biggest crowd I've ever had when I've been talking at Learning Technologies. And this is not the first time I've spoken about data-related topics. And I think this is probably telling us that Don's survey with learning analytics as number one subject at the moment is actually real to all of you here. So thank you all for taking the time to come to this session and not somebody else's. Before we start, a question for you. How do you report today? How many of you are doing some of these things? How many people still counting bums on seats? Be honest. A lot of you. Number of people trained. How many are still reporting on the percentage of people that passed the compliance course? Probably all of you, yeah? I'm assuming all of you make that course available to Russian and Chinese hackers, so your percentage is right, yeah? Okay. What other things are you reporting on? Has anybody here got something very, very different in the way that they're reporting today? Ah, we've got some hands. Brilliant. Yes, sir.
Learner engagement and, learner NPS.
Learner NPS, yep. Somebody behind you, the lady there with the hand?
Report on the language that people use in the organization, how it changes depending on what kind of learning has they've done.
Okay, and one more down here.
We report on evaluation. What evaluation is done on what courses.
Okay. So, fairly standard sort of stuff still for many of you. Of course, before we can do any of these things, you need the data. This is all about data at the end of the day. But to make really meaningful understanding of what's going on, learning data is not the only thing you need. And your LMS cannot tell you everything you need to know in isolation. Absolutely not. So, what other data sources do you need? This is here, so for those of you who will take the slides away, you will understand what a data lake is. I would not normally present such a crass slide in a presentation. It's there for your benefit for later. What data sources do you think you might need to help you get understanding from what's going on in the world of learning? Any ideas out there?
Age of learning.
Age of learners? Possibly, yeah. Interesting. Anybody else?
Financial KPIs, because the one question that remains in the end is like, how would that affect our business?
Absolutely. Financial data. Now, that data doesn't sit in your LMS or your LXP. That sits possibly in your Oracle financial system. Some of it will be in Salesforce.com if you're an organization that sells courses. It might also be in your ServiceNow application. Yes, sir?
The number of people leaving the company or getting promoted?
That's a great one. I did some analysis like that with a previous company, and they were astounded to learn that 50% of the workforce today would not be there in 5 years' time. Stunning. what impact does that have on the knowledge retention in that organisation? Of course, they ignored it. It's not my current employers, I have to say. So, of course, all that data sits in systems outside of the LMS. And so one of the ways, and the way that we're doing this, as you would expect from a company that is all about data, is we have our own organisational-wide data lake. So why do we do this? There are a number of reasons that have come out there. First of all of our sales data is not in the LMS. I've mentioned that already. But for us in the world of learning, it's becoming more complex as well. Your LMS will not necessarily have all of the data that you really need to understand people's engagement with video. Whereas Brightcove, where a lot of you may be hosting it, has a lot of rich data tucked away in there that will never get in your LMS. How many people are using Udemy? Yeah? Do you have an integration back into your learning record store or your LMS that tells you when people have completed it? No, neither do we. So we're missing a vital piece of data there. Skillsoft Percipio, great tool. Doesn't have an integration back to our LMS provider right at this moment. So somebody gets in there on a mandated course, they discover other stuff. We don't know anything about it. So these are just some examples of other systems that we're using in learning where the data would be really useful. We just don't have it in the right place, in the same place. MindTickle, who I believe are downstairs, a great sales enablement platform. But it's not talking to the same data store where the bulk of the data is. And performance management, if you're going to look at improving people, you might want to correlate your data with data that sits in your performance management system. How many of you have a separate performance management system to your learning platform? Quite a few. So getting all this data into one place is really, really important if you're going to make some sense of it. So there's a huge magical thing that happens now where we get all that data into one place, and I don't, unfortunately, in 20 minutes have time to go through that. But trust me, this magic happens, and our IT folks have got all the data in one place. So what does that mean for us in L&D? Well, first of all, somebody's got to understand what that data means. How many of your IT folks do you think would know what a user table in Cornerstone looks like as a native database table? They wouldn't. And I can tell you that the user ID, for example, in Cornerstone, in the database table, bears no relationship to what you see in the user interface. Things like you've collected some additional data using custom fields. So you call your custom field, I don't know, global course code. What do you think that's called in the underlying database table? It's called custom_field_28. So somebody needs to understand the learning data, and your IT folks are not the people who are going to do that, and they will be coming back to you. So what we need to be able to do is get this data joined together. For us, one of the best things we ever did was to ensure that we provision all of our learning systems in the same way. So the users have the same ID in our LMS as they do in our customer system in salesforce.com. The organization codes are the same between Salesforce and the LMS. So when we come to correlate the data, we can actually join this stuff back together. And that's all achieved through using provisioning and single sign-on, which also is a much better customer experience for us. And to give you some examples of what we're doing here, because we're working in a very different sort of space in terms of what does the learning data mean. We are very much a sales organisation. Whilst we train our own internal people, we are predominantly training customers and partners. So we have to manage a partner program. For any of you here who work for an IT company, you'll probably be familiar with partner programs where you have a platinum partner, gold, silver, and different requirements for those organisations to maintain that status. And that's important for us to ensure that they are compliant with the program. It's also very important for them because there are financial benefits from being a platinum partner compared to being a bronze partner. As with many organisations, we do this by giving them a program of courses they need to take and certifications they need to gain. So we also run within our team the Hitachi Certified Professional Program, and that is managed using specialist tools. Anybody else here run a certification program? Interestingly, none. So those of you who've taken a certification like the Microsoft Certified Engineer, you will have used tools like Prometric Testing Centres, Criterion, Pearson, and the like. So we have to use those as well. So this is yet another data source for us that is not in the LMS. We try to import it into the LMS, but the quality of the data matches when somebody signs up with Criterion using their Hotmail account compared to what we've got in the LMS. You can imagine some of the difficulties that has. So we have to manage that program with data from multiple sources. So what you see here is a lot. This is real, by the way, it's not vaporware. I've just hidden the company names to protect the guilty. So this comprises data from salesforce.com on what the program is and what level you are. And it comprises data from our CertMetrics certification management tool and the LMS. All of that data automatically generated on the fly whenever you want, this dashboard. For us, that has replaced lots and lots of manual work, particularly when you're doing it in Excel. Who here has come close to breaking Excel's abilities? Yeah, we have. The only thing that saves most of us is that periodically Excel will increase or do a version of Excel that actually ups how many records you can actually manage, but we are dangerously close to it with a lot of our traditional ways of combining data. So a data lake and the appropriate tools really is a great answer to doing this. This is presented in a tool called Pentaho. Shameless plug. Pentaho is a Hitachi product. Here's a second example, and this is focusing more on our internal people. And I alluded earlier to, we could say we've trained 2,000 salesmen this year. What does that mean, though? It means 2,000 guys attended maybe a 3-day course, and we lost 6,000 person days of their ability to be out on the road selling, and we don't know whether it improved them, because the LMS can't tell you that. What can tell you that are the tools such as your Oracle Financials tools, or whichever one you use, Salesforce.com, all of this kind of stuff. What you can see on the screen here now, this is genuine data where we decided to analyze some training we put in place for our pre-sales organization. Any pre-sales folks in here? Right, so you know what pipeline means then. It's all about pipeline, what's coming up that you can go and sell. So the bigger the pipeline, by definition, the better the sales opportunities will result from it. So by connecting data from Salesforce.com with learning data, we have been able to review the training program that was given to our pre-sales folks and compare it with those who didn't attend the training. So 45% of the reps didn't do any training on this particular product in a 2-year period. Most of those had 0 opportunities in their pipeline. Nothing. Of the 19 who did complete 4 specific courses over that 2-year period, they had 3 more opportunities per rep than is normal, and the ability to close the deal was showing a 4 times improvement. This justifies, to a large extent, the 4 courses that we put into place for this group down here. You will never know that from your LMS. You can only know this if you can correlate the data with other data. And we're going to be looking to do this much more robustly and in an automated fashion once again, so that people can go to a dashboard and look at this kind of stuff. It becomes really interesting now, because when I said earlier about people accounting bums on seats, if we know they've done these 4 courses, then that number of bums on seats is now relevant. Until you know that, it's not, because you can't infer anything from it. So fascinating stuff. Many of you, I suspect, are working just in an L&D environment with internal people, and maybe this doesn't apply to you, but you might think, well, actually, there are some of this thinking I can apply to what we're doing with our own internal people. So it's all about the data and correlation. However, don't forget that correlation versus causation is a dangerous path sometimes. There's a whole website full of this stuff, but there is a direct correlation between the divorce rate in Maine and the per capita consumption of margarine. Now, this website, the source is on there, is full of fascinating things like this. So there's another one relating to death and the incidence of films with Nicolas Cage in them. But of course, what would a marketing person do? They would look at this and say, well, when the divorce rate was higher, people were consuming more margarine because you've got all these single men who can't afford butter anymore, perhaps. So just be careful of that. Just because there's a correlation doesn't necessarily mean that causation is in place. So lots of stuff that you have to look at in terms of when you're comparing data. But you can make quite a few inferences, certainly on the one I did before, with the sales versus the training. So what skills do we need in L&D to do this? And I've had a number of people say, well, we've got to have data scientists in learning. We don't. First question, any data scientists in the room? Nobody wants to admit to one. Come on, I mean, our keynote admitted to being a Liverpool fan. I mean, you're amongst friends here. Okay, so do we all now need to be data scientists? No, we don't. I quite like this term that's come up, which is a new sort of role, which is called citizen data scientist. And I think we have quite a few of those probably in the room today without you realizing it. And this is people who have a passion for data. People who have a passion for making sure that our work contributes towards the organizational strategy. And these will be the people that, when you want to start analyzing data, that IT will come to and say, where the heck are these fields in your learning system? That's the person who will know. He won't know what the corresponding ones in Salesforce are, but within his domain or her domain, they will have a passion for data, an understanding of the data that we have within our learning teams, and be able to use some of the basic tools that are out there, which are becoming much more drag and drop today. So, having now sort of shared that role with you, how many of you here think, maybe I am a citizen data scientist? Anybody heading in that direction? Yeah, we've got a few. Of course, you will need data scientists later, but that's at the point in time where you've done all of this stuff and you're now ready to have people say to you, did you know this was a problem? You didn't ask me the question, but I've been looking at your data and I can see this. And that's the natural evolution of this, and that's where perhaps data science and much more powerful tools will help us. But we're nowhere near that yet. We've got to get through this sort of level of correlation first. And to do all of that, you need to know your business goals. You need to understand what the data is in your learning systems. I'm saying LMS here. It could be your LRS, your LXP. It could be an Excel spreadsheet you got from Udemy with some results on it. You need to understand how that can all fit together to make sense of it. You need a technology ecosystem that really supports all of that. So things like Make sure you've got SSO in place so you do know that Fred Smith at Hotmail is frederick.smith@hitachivantara.com. And with a name like F. Smith, that's not as easy as it sounds. And tools that can be easily used by this new breed of citizen data scientist. So I've got some takeaways for you. This is the bridge that Don used to talk about. What can you take away home with you to help you look at some of this? So this is all free stuff in the main. So you want somewhere to host a data lake or a data warehouse, however, a data pond even. Just don't let it become a data swamp. Then AWS, Amazon Web Services, do have a free tier offering where you can go and sign up and get yourself some cloud storage to do this in. Use to analyze your data. Clearly, you're not going to do all of that by Monday morning, but there are opportunities for you to say, well, actually, I want to test this out a little bit. Let me see if I can get my data out of my LMS. Let me see if I can pull it into a database that I stick up in Amazon Web Services. Let me try with one of these two tools to make some sense of that data and correlate it with other stuff. And you don't necessarily need to access your Salesforce system to do this. You can also import Excel extracts into both of those tools on the right there, because your IT department aren't going to give you direct access to Salesforce anyway for this, probably. Which is why we have it in a data lake, because there we do get access to it. So that's a different view from us on learning metrics, because for us it is a very different environment. I think between the two case studies you've heard today, there's hopefully a lot there that you can take home with you and say, hadn't thought about that. And if there isn't, then come back to this room, same time tomorrow morning, where there is another set, two speakers on this similar topic, and I'll be back here sharing that one. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you guys. Like I say, this is a topic I've got that I'm passionate about, and I've got 4 questions here already, but there we go. Not my job to ask them all. What questions have you got? Remember the great phrase I heard at Learning Technologies at Olympia a few years ago: content is king, but context is kingdom. And what really matters is what these guys have said, but how you could apply it within your role and the activities that you've got, exactly as Andy said. So do you need some help understanding something? What questions have you got? Lady with the white.
Just interested in Bruce's example. On the very last slide, you said you've got a clear ROI of 30%. I just wonder what metrics you used to measure your ROI right at the end of your project.
Yeah, sure. So the way we measure that... Sorry. Yeah, sure. So I was asked how we measured the ROI based on the case study I spoke about. So we had a financial outlay. So we knew how much money we'd spent in terms of the platform, the well-being, everything else. So we had an idea of what the cost was. And the ROI was then offset against the costs we would normally have invested in recruitment, in ongoing training, in multiple contacts as well. So we had a very good idea about the cost that we saved versus the cost that we invested.
Who else has to ask a question? Have we got a microphone? Awesome. There we go. A gentleman with the check shirt. There we go. Use the microphone. Sorry, I didn't realise you had the mic. Sorry, thank you.
This is a question also for Bruce. You talked about the effort of supporting the program after implementation. What was the balance in percentage roughly between the implementation effort, costs, time, and the support? Because that's where we and many people struggle.
Yeah, so we were quite lucky in terms of the amount of time and effort we invested post-implementation. We identified members within our contact center team who either had spare utilization, so they may have been supporting low volume languages, or those who were just genuinely enthusiastic. And we use them almost as learning development, employee engagement evangelists. So they would support the project. That was significantly lower cost than the whole trying to engage stakeholders, building out the strategy, and deploying the platform. So I would say that in terms of a cost and time split, it's probably 80 to 85% in terms of the pre-launch.
The comms bit is really important. I blogged about that today. It was a brilliant example someone said to me was they walked into a doctor's surgery and there's dozens of posters around. So everybody can tick a box and go, yeah, I communicated, but actually have you? I think that we're missing something there. Gentleman with the white shirt and the beard.
This one is also for Bruce. Yeah, for me, it sounded like you've really done a great job with finding what kind of challenges your employees were actually having. And you mentioned some of the tactics that you were using, MPS as one. What other kind of tactics do you have of finding out those challenges that your employees were facing?
Sure. So our business in customer care revolves around people. And the quickest way to understand how a person is feeling is often just to talk to them. So we've got centres, contact centres in different parts of Europe, and myself and my team spend a fair amount of time going out to the contact centres, sitting with the teams of agents and talking to them. So we'll have focus groups, we'll have roundtable sessions. Sometimes they are structured where there are questions that we really want to understand. And sometimes it's let's go grab a cup of coffee and just be social. So you glean an awful lot of insight about how people are feeling just by having conversations. So we also mentioned the touch button kiosks, so we get almost a real-time feel regarding agent sentiment. We do confidential agent surveys, so we put surveys out to the agents once a quarter so they can share back confidentially. And the Spark platform is a channel of communication whereby agents can share their comments with other people within their community and have open conversations. So there's a lot of work that we do in terms of trying to understand not just how well is someone doing, but where's someone struggling, what else do they need, and how can we as a manufacturer lend them support.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Andy a question because he's been left out. Aggregating data is hard.
Sorry?
Aggregating data is
Yeah.
hard. How do you make it easier?
You just employ the right people.
Like who? So in terms of right people, what do you mean right people?
Well, it depends at what level you're going to be doing this. Now, for the examples I showed you there, of course, we need to develop skills in some of these end-user tools such as Power BI, Pentaho and stuff. But there's an amazing amount you can do with an expert in Excel. And I'm sure many of us have already got that person in their team and are probably really, really worried if they ever leave. So there's a heck of a lot you can do in Excel to do this, but with the vast quantity of data we're talking about, you're going to break that. At that point, you then need to be getting people who can understand these end-user tools, and that's not for everybody. But that is where I would say you probably need to invest in some training for the right people there.
Cool.
But short term, yeah, get some Excel skills going.
Cool. Thank you. Other questions? Gentleman at the front here. Sorry. Do you want to hang on 1 second? We'll just bring the microphone to you. Sorry.
Hi Andy, it's a question on data. When you've presented your data to the management team or to the workforce, has it ever been challenged and have people have questioned how you've come to that conclusion?
No, it hasn't. We're very fortunate that I didn't explain what we do at Hitachi Vantara, but we are all about data. We manufacture and sell digital infrastructure and digital solutions, including a lot of very advanced AI type tools and stuff like that. Our workforce and our customers and partners use this stuff on a daily basis. But I can imagine in some organizations you would need to be proving that point a little bit more than I need to. But our people trust the tools, particularly when we're drinking our own champagne by using our own products. But it's a great point, because in other organizations where this is new, there may be distrust, and you're going to have to, it will eventually come, I think.
That's an interesting question, because you're working within that field. So I work in government. Obviously, we've got a massive amount of data as well, but it's using that data in a way to prove what we want it to prove, as opposed to...
Yes, and of course people are very mindful of the old saying, lies, lies, damn lies and statistics, particularly in light of things like 355 million on the side of a bus. None of these things help us in terms of making people believe the data that we're presenting to them. And I think it doesn't matter, this is not a pitch either side, but Brexit has been a very good example where the same data sets have been used by both sides at some point in times to try and prove opposing views. It's amazing what you can do with data, isn't it?
What else do you want to ask? If not, I've got more questions. I've got another 3 or 4 here. I'll go back to you, Bruce. So doing that differently in Panasonic, what was the cost?
So doing it differently... Is that working still?
It is, yeah.
Okay. So doing what we did was not as expensive as we initially thought it would be. I think the most costly bit, I think, was probably management time. And I think if we're going to put a pound figure on it in terms of over the course of a year, it would have been less than £30,000. So we're not talking about far-reaching, really costly exercises. I think a lot of it is just having the willingness to invest your time and effort in it. And the reality is there were times where we were doing work outside of normal working hours. You just had to get it done.
And did you have any difficulty getting buy-in from the people to want to invest that time? And if you did, how did you overcome it?
I think I'm quite lucky. So the team that I have working with me at Panasonic are incredibly capable, very passionate, very driven. So getting them involved right from the outset in terms of getting their help building the strategy, I think was the biggest step I needed to take. Once we'd all aligned on what we wanted to achieve, the doing of the work was actually reasonably straightforward. We all understood the part that we had to play. We all had different accountabilities in terms of which parts of the product are we going to be delivering. And we just went about getting it done. There was never a time when anybody pushed back, when anyone thought, hang on, this isn't the right thing to do. So I think I was incredibly fortunate that we had a very compelling story to tell, and it wasn't just the direct team that bought into it, it was the wider organization. And I think we're continuing to see traction on how we drive that message, not just within our own service department, but to the wider Panasonic organization and even outside of our European organization.
Question here for the people here. Who thinks they might have some pushback from their managers if they start doing things differently, or pushback from sponsors? Interesting. I'm curious as to what some of those challenges might be, perhaps. Another question, there's a gentleman at the front here.
Yeah, so connecting to your story, or to your answer actually, I think these were problems that existed for a longer time already. Like, did other initiatives pop up too before you came up with the tool and the solution you proposed?
Yeah, so we engaged with Fuse, I think back in 2014, 2015, on a very small scale, just focused in the UK. And that was our very first exploration of what learning and development might look like. That was very much focused on repair centres rather than frontline customer care. And the reality is that there just wasn't enough in the way of engagement up front. So the teams running the project hadn't fully engaged the right stakeholder groups, hadn't fully engaged the working groups, hadn't properly understood the requirements. And it was a really good example of a let's launch it and leave it. And it served a purpose, but it didn't have the impact that I think it needed to have. So a few years on, we revisited it with a slightly different angle. We came at it from a slightly different angle and used the customer care elements in terms of how do we enrich agents' lives, how do we enrich customers' lives. And we took learnings from the first iteration and realized actually we have to invest time. There has to be this constant drumbeat of this is the message, this is the strategy, this is the story, and that flow, that continuous flow of content, giving people a reason to go back to the Spark platform, giving people a reason to engage with L&D. It's not about the business, it's about you as an individual. By going through this process, by looking at this content, by taking on this coaching and mentoring, this is how you benefit. The offshoot of that is that the business benefits as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
What else do you want to know? Lady here at the front. Sorry, making you run about today.
Hi, my question's for Andy. Hopefully I can articulate it. So it might relate to the man's question about, which ended up being a discussion about trust, or an issue about trust, I suppose, in the data and the correlations. I'm just wondering if there's one thing that you could advise an organisation to ensure that they do, so that then they can develop a confidence in the correlations that they're arriving at and the insights and inferences that they make from that.
It's an old saying, isn't it? You get one opportunity to make a first impression. And so the first thing you launch out there needs to be absolutely accurate, because if it isn't, and people question the data, it's going to be forever before you win them back over. So part of that for us was a very, very lengthy period of reconciling the data, so running reports in our new data lake, comparing them with the source data. That took an inordinate amount of time, but it was absolutely vital to ensure that the results we were giving were actually totally believable. Because if you make a mistake and something goes wrong, it is very difficult to persuade somebody the next time that actually the data is correct. To give you some examples of the things that tripped us up, and this will trip many of you up there, if you pull a table in from your database and say who's got this particular certification, and that table includes the course owner, and you have multiple course owners, you're going to have a line of data for each of those records, the only difference being the course owner. Things such as that, when we were launching in our pilot, somebody saying, why are we getting duplicate records of everything? We don't trust this data. So this goes back to make sure you do all that analysis, comparing the data lake with the original source, and understanding how the database is constructed, the database tables in your LRS, LMS, LXP, call it what you want. Because if you don't understand them, you're going to land up putting reports out there potentially with duplicated data, and that's when you'll start to lose the trust of people. But so get it right first time, I think, is, and we spent a lot of time, a number of months, in fact, validating the data.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Any more for any more? Oh.
I guess this is to an extent for Andy, but probably for both, that integration of data from our internal business systems absolutely has to rest with us as individual businesses. But since the current sort of direction of travel in L&D technology appears to be around system aggregation, do you have any thoughts about how we can essentially not finish up taking that monkey on our own shoulders, but actually working with the technology providers to speed the degree of data integration and system integration that we're seeing? Because I think that's going to be a huge problem for all of us as we go down this path.
It's an interesting question, and a lot of people, including vendors, have said to me, oh, you can just bring your Salesforce data into our database here because we've got all these wonderful tools. Absolutely not. We wanted it all in one place, and so it really doesn't worry me whether it has to come from multiple systems, but we need it in a secure location where we can do all the analysis on it. So, not too worried in that respect. I mean, we're seeing a plethora of systems out there now, and I will be looking to pull, for example, Udemy data into the same place, Skillsoft Percipio data, unless they get their act together and do the integration to the LMS. And so it goes on, There's Linux Academy is another one we use. All these data sources, ultimately, we have one solution for them, is our data lake. Put the data in there, and the rest of it is all under our control. So we're quite happy with that sort of approach. It may not work for everybody. Does that answer the question?
That's exactly the...
Well, it sort of says the answer is we take them on, but
yeah, to put it into your terms, yes, we do. Because if we don't earn it. Oh, is it gone again? Yeah, sorry, to put that into your terms, yes, we do own the monkey. We take the monkey because if we don't own the monkey, then you're dependent on other people for doing all of this. What I want is a data source that I can go into at any time and work on it without having to think about, oh my God, I've got to go and speak to him, to her, and so on, just to get access to this data before I even think about anything else.
In question, because that's exactly the issue that I'm working with an HMRC as well. And then the question is, well, who owns that data? And so to me, it's not about learning. Actually, it's HR and people data. But trying to get the HR people to understand that all of that data is theirs and all of the other data so that we can then have a complete, the data lake idea, we can have that all in one place to then start applying some insight to it is actually the most important part of it. So.
That's a very good point there, though, because there is a huge governance issue on all of this. Once you start getting this data all into one place, whilst the learning team, we are not part of HR, we're not part of L&D, we're not part of talents. We came from a marketing background and we're now part of a professional services team. We own the training record data in our LMS, but we do not own the people data that sits in that same LMS. Once you've got that into a data lake, you're into some real complications about multiple data owners, some of whom will permit you to do certain things and others won't. So you've got to cross all of those, and this is actually right, because we are paranoid, and quite rightly so, about the security of the data that we hold on behalf of our customers and partners. For us as a data company, if we suffered a breach like Target did in the US, I haven't seen a Target store shut down, and I haven't seen people stop using their credit cards in Target over in the US, but we're a data company. If anything like that happened to us, that could be a killer for the business. So, yes, we are absolutely paranoid about all of that kind of security stuff as well, and it's really important. Once again, it's a very good reason for having it all in one place where we've got all of that ability to put those controls on it.
Okay, time's up. Once again, thank you to you two, but also thank you for some really interesting questions. Both Andy and Bruce will still be here. You're here both days, aren't you guys? Yeah. So they'll be around if you've got any further questions for them. Please take some time out, enjoy your lunch, and come back refreshed, ready for this afternoon session. But we can just say thank you again to Bruce and Andy.